Okay, welcome everyone. I guess we'll get starting, and more participants will join us in a minute. Welcome to this new edition of the ESSEC Amundi Chair webinar. This is our third edition this year, and this webinar will be on ESG news, financial markets, and active asset management views from Amundi. And we have two collaborators from Amundi presenting their part of their research today. The first presentation is by Takaya Sekin on corporate ESG news and the stock market. And this will be followed by a presentation by Jean-Marie Dumas and possibly other colleagues of his on temperature scores and innovative tool for ESG fundamental investors. So the structure of the webinar is simple. Each presenter has about 30 minutes for presenting his research. There's 10 minutes of questions from the audience. And so people may step in during the presentation and wait at the end. It's as you want. And so I'll leave the floor to Takaya, who will present the result of his research on corporate ESG news and the stock market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So I hope you see my slides, and so let's get started. Okay, so good early afternoon for you in the attendance. I'm really happy to present our research on corporate ESG news and the stock market. First, I will start by introducing a short timeline of our result, because this precise question was this precise research was response to a puzzle we found in our ESG research. So just briefly to present, not really present, but to introduce Amundi again. We are one of the first signatories of UNPRI. And we have been running ESG since the start of the company, I would say, and we have our roots in a small ESG dedicated firm, which was called IDEAM at the time, and which was on board, integrated in full by Amundi around 27. So we have, from this history, we have ESG scores since 2010, which is quite a unique situation in the industry. So a lot of ESG scores for asset managers would be recalculated because they were not specifically looking at ESG subject in the past. However, in our case, we have truly point-in-time ESG scores covering issuers, which means that the scores that we are looking at in the past are exactly the score we had with no look-ahead bias, no perfect insights that beginners in the market might integrate in their scores. So so here I'm starting in 2018, but actually there was a piece of research which came out in 2014 with data up to 2012, which basically was saying that it was okay to look at ESG, but in equity and credit, but you should diversify your portfolio a lot so that your willingness to do ESG would not penalize your portfolio. So to reduce the let's say financial negative impact of having ESG in your portfolio at that time, we are encouraged to diversify a lot. So in 2018, so we refreshed this analysis, and we really came up with surprising results. And we identified that the market really changed radically between maybe 2010, 2013 period and 2014, 2017, 2018. So we call this 2014 break. So there are many reasons if you think about it, because maybe you remember 2015 was a critical Paris Agreement with the COP21. You also had a lot of ESG subject which migrated from concern to regulation in the European area, EMU. And also very important was the conversion of the Millennium Goals to the SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals. So these goals came about in 2015. And what is extremely important is that when you look at the SDG by construction, they are underfunded. So you do not have national funding of SDGs. So the UN have set up this objective, knowing perfectly well that to fund and to therefore be successful, you need 2/3 of the cost of the SDG has to be brought by different parties. So you have to involve a lot of parties to have a success, because if you do not involve parties, such as asset owners or others, you would not be able to succeed in the SDGs, because you only have the capacity nationally. Well, if you take the nations, you only have the capacity to finance about 1/3 of it. And also, so the stakeholder was very important. Then following this, what we say in 2018, we identify slowly that yes, with same in credits and in equity, we have also differences coming between EMU and NORFAM, because we start to see different dynamics. I said that regulation were coming in the Eurozone, whereas in North America, it's still a very polarized market around ESG. Just in the FT last Sunday, there was a news about big tech companies trying to water down the SEC's ambition to have disclosure on ESG subjects. So still in the US, it's a very, let's say, polarized situation where you don't really have full engagement towards ESG subjects. So we saw different dynamics. And also one important point for us is that ESG is, when you decide to do ESG, it's not a swap. You do not simply swap your assets from a blend equity allocation to equity plus ESG allocation. Doing ESG means that you're bringing in an ESG risk, which is incompressible. And so you need to think entirely differently. So that's something which we saw. And also what we found very peculiar was that we had been looking at best versus worst approaches to see, does ESG work? So I mean, I'll get into this right now, but we identified some action on ESG, on the ESG performance towards the tail end of the spectrum for the scores. So it was a little bit surprising. So anyway, that's when we decided to look closer at the new subjects and here. So I'll just jump into what we'll be looking at. But so just to start with, here what we look at for ESG, it's our Amundi's ESG score, which is defined by ESG pillars. You have broad components such as emission, energy use. So this will be broad, and you have also sector-specific or industry-specific components, which will be industry-specific, not broad. So you have E, S, and G. You recombine, and this brings a ESG score. We have a lot of vendors, 4 or 5, providing the sources, and the analysts, and Mathieu, who will be also speaking later, on the team in charge of combining and making the choices for the providers, etc. What is really important, I would say, is that there is a sector neutralization of the score. So when you bring this E, S, and G, you take the data, you bring it together. So you have this layer where you have just prepared the data. Then you have an additional step where you will neutralize your ESG scores. And this step of sector neutralization is extremely important, because it is on this step, at least for the developed market, it is on these steps that you will start to connect, for example, ESG and fundamentals, such as profitability, return on equity, or multiples. You really need to do this sector to bring this score against comparable within their own sectors. So when you think of ESG, you're thinking how a company is doing versus a peer in its sector. And then you really have a score which is working financially, which can connect to the way, for example, by doing this, you have some companies where a change in ESG score will have the same movement for profitability, this kind of things. If you do not do this sector neutralization, you do not see this happening. So it's in the construct of the score, the sector neutralization is extremely important. And then we enter in the what we call basic quintile approach, which is a proxy of basic is a proxy of active management. So you break down in a top 20, the next 20, next 20, and bottom 20. And then we rank, and from the rankings here, we want to see if it is going in the right direction. If by projecting your portfolio along bad, less bad, middle, almost good, and better quintiles, is this going to have an impact on my performance? So this was what we are looking at. So this is the slope between the Q1 is the best 20%, Q5 is the worst 20%. So for example, this is for environmental on 2018, 2019. What we were seeing is that when I call the break was that if you look at the ranking started to be consistent between best versus worst. So if you had a portfolio of best 20%, then it was interesting to have this portfolio long versus the worst 20% short. So I'm not going to discuss more about this, but this is what we are looking at. So by saying we are looking at proxy of active management, we were saying, okay, so if I take the top 20% of my industry neutralized ESG scores, will I be performing better than average or worse 20%? So this is a way to approach active management. It's a proxy. So what was interesting on the 2014 break was that we saw that before it was not so interesting. So you could have very good performance from the best, but also the same performance from the worst. So it was a U shape. So ESG was not really differentiating. And then after 2014, we start to see that best versus worst is working. However, as we were focusing on the long side, we saw that, interestingly, there was something we could not escape, and that even on the lower side, there was a dynamic between Q4 and Q5. You see the worst, really worst, and almost the 20% before the worst. There was a really interesting dynamic that we did not really understand. So we stopped there, and then we tried to see what was why we were seeing these kind of things, and is there what it meant for ESG investing. Okay, so if you think about it, when we're talking about ESG through time, so in the recent past, there has been an evolution from maybe people who are looking at ESG, so ESG investors, within the total community of investors, maybe these were not dominant. So you had some investors like us who wanted to look at ESG, and you had a lot of investors who were not interested. So there were so much investors who were not interested by ESG that ESG used to be called extra financial. So we have an analyst desk for a long time. Now they're called ESG analysts. You call maybe SRI before, sustainable responsible investing before. Now they're called ESG, but before that, they used to be called extra financial analyst desk, because we said that, okay, so all these things around ESG happen in the firm, but it's extra financial, you push it. It's for people who want to look at performance, etc. It's not important. So that was the way ESG was looked at. And now there's an evolution where you have maybe more investors who are starting to look at the ESG. But there's a slight question which comes here, which is that when you talk about efficient market hypothesis, you say that market price should incorporate all information. We say rationally and instantaneously. Rationally means if it's good, it's going to help your assets return, and instantaneously is it's immediate. But there's a problem here is that the efficient market hypothesis. So we say market price incorporate all information. So its information is given, split, and all actors understand that, okay, so if you have a bankruptcy, it's not going to be good for your company. Okay, this is quite immediate. However, you do not have investors who decide that, okay, so bankruptcy, oh no, I flag bankruptcy as information I don't want to look at when I want to invest. So, so this bankruptcy goes into asset prices. But here you're in a very special situation where by choice, you have investors who decide that they don't want to incorporate ESG, they don't want to look at ESG, ESG is not relevant. So you cannot apply the efficient market hypothesis cannot be applied here because it's not, because people decide to not integrate ESG information. So this breaks the rationally, instantaneously, and all information, all this hypothesis for the market efficiency doesn't work. So one way we try to look at it is, okay, so suppose you have a spectrum where you have stocks where you have a lot of ESG information. So maybe on this area where you're going to have a lot of ESG information, maybe people will look at this information and will act on this information, and it will be consistent between investors because it will be stocks which have some volume or which have some news flow every day. Everybody can see that there are ESG subjects which are discussed. So what we started to look at is first, do we have this kind of information? So yes, we have. So basically, we back our data on a vendor which is called TrueValue. So what they do, these guys, they split between, they look at materiality of information, then they split on one side. So the pulse here is going to be the polarity. So is it good or bad? And on the other side, it's the volume. So how many information do you have? That's materiality means that it's flagged through the SASB framework. So, SASB says that on certain sectors have certain KPIs or materiality. For example, if you look at financials, it's not so important what they do on the carbon emission because financial banks are not the worst polluters in the world, for example. So if you're looking at emissions, you want to go on mining, construction, etc. This is where you will see some materiality. So they filter a little bit. So that's why it's a materiality which is focused on the SASB framework, materiality framework. And you can go on the website for SASB. They have a nice sector and a material subject. It's a materiality map, and it's really easy to see as an approach. You can agree or not, but it's a common framework for reporting. And then the only difference from the insight and the pulse here is that on the polarity, do you want to rate the information which is coming out one day, or do you want to kind of 6 months exponential smooth? If you smooth, it's an insight. So it's a little bit more stable than the pulse. So we have this information on volume and polarity. And we just, for example, if we take the case of Volkswagen, this is the news on Volkswagen. Up you have the accusation by the regulator on the emissions, up the news will increase on the subject. And when you look at the breakdown of the news, this guy is in blue, which is coming up, and so this guy is in blue is business ethics. So when you have the accusation, a lot of information was about what's going on with Volkswagen. How is the business ethics? You should wonder, and you should be right to wonder. So this kind of things. And what was quite remarkable was that coming from the red here is exactly it's exactly our situation. And what we decided to do was just to do some brackets of information. So the more you have information, so we filter the universe that we were looking. So the initial point here for the Q4, the initial point was a situation where we don't filter. We filter a little bit here. So this is the orange, a little bit more. So more news. So we filter on the more concentrated news on ESG. It's the green side, a little bit more pink, and even a little bit more blue. So what was very spectacular is that here, just by focusing on the universe on areas where there is important ESG news volume, so where information is circulating on ESG, you start to rank in a consistent way your quintile. So the better you are on this is an environmental score, the better you're ranked. And you don't have this anomaly totally disappears on the Q4 effect. So it's very spectacular, but what we identify here is that on a sub-component of the universe where there is a decent ESG information in terms of volume, then the way investors look at this universe becomes rational. So we take away the Q4 effect. So this was very spectacular. And then when we look at this kind of effect, because this is about ESG news, so is it really about ESG news or is it about another effect? So that's something we wanted to check because, for example, if you look at, there's a big comment which is going in the market about, for example, if you have two green bonds, which are perfectly similar, but one, the firm decided to file all the questionnaire and to do all the process to file it as a green bond, agreed by the green bond principles and everything, and exactly the same bond, but financing the same project, but where the company did not file the information. So the question is, are these bonds really different? And has this bond become a green bond because the firm has decided to invest in filing, in communicating? And the big question is the ESG effect a size effect or a marketing effect? So we want to check here. So we compared our results here for EMU and 2014-2019 period. That's for the sentiment score. And basically we do the same filter, but here we decide to filter on the number of news versus size. So we take here we take the more news, the more there is news, the more you will be blue. And here the highest size component is, so we're filtering the top in terms of size, and we see that it's not the same behavior. I mean, we do not have the same transformation on the Q4 and the Q5 here. So we do not have a alignment of Q4 and Q5 the same way here as we have on the ESG news volume on the left. ESG news volume is filtered, and these two are really just on the left. We decide to filter by increasing news, And here on the right, we just filter by increasing, we cut the smaller caps slowly. So top, we cut the 10%, 20%, 40%, 40%. Just to compare if these two would have the same behavior, and actually they don't. So basically, we comfort the fact that if you want to look at ESG news volume, you're not simply looking at a size effect. So this is comforting, meaning that it's something which is new, real, and that you can play around in an investment process. So just when we look at the 2010-2013 period, the adjustments, the magnitude of the adjustments, especially on the lower end, is just spectacular. Because if you look back at the practice of ESG, you had a lot of people who decided to not look so much at ESG, but still look at ESG when bad things were happening. So that's why when we started to say, is ESG a factor? A lot of people came back to us saying, maybe ESG is not a factor, but it's a risk. And the perception that it was a risk was that filtering ESG was if you filtered good or bad ESG events from your portfolio, you could avoid drawdowns. So you know the downside, and this is exactly how you can see it. So you have your initial situation here, I think, where we can reverse totally the you can reverse your ranking between the Q4 and the Q5, which is a consistent way. So we are not saying that the news volume is the solution to everything. We're just saying that at the extreme situation, so Q1 versus Q2, so not extreme, but edge, so Q4 ranking consistent of the ranking between first and second quintile, so the edge, positive edge, and the consistency of the ranking on the negative, the bottom side, so Q4 and Q5, having the volume filter is going to help you. And the magnitudes were quite wide before. It's normalized a little bit, but still it is here. So we just sum up our results. We find that it's not solving everything, but still you can see some positive effects on the edges Q1, Q2, Q4, Q5 here. So we just look at this. These were the main results we put in our paper. Something we also identified was that there were some overreaction effects, namely mostly in the US recently. So this is something we can explore in the future. The question was, so you know, in the first part in our results, we said that maybe ESG is the next factor. But do you want to see if these results we just saw on the volume and on the ESG polarity, so the insight, so what we call we like to call a proxy for sentiment, how do they fit in the factor story? So we built several models, you know, with classical models here, 5 factors, plus we add the sentiment as a 6th factor, or we can add just ESG as a 6th factor and compare the result, or add both. And we see that it's not so appealing. So it's not, R square is not revolutionized by the addition of sentiment here or just ESG. So you're really not adding much information. So this is mu, North America, it's not spectacular. But still, so the question is, what is going to differentiate between, is it interesting to look at ESG in a factor framework or look at sentiment in a factor framework? It's not so much the regression in itself, but it's the order in which you want to pick the factors. So for this, we do a penalized lasso regression, which basically is, so this is, for example, on the Eurozone, this beta here, or these are the final beta. But when you're doing the regression, you're not just jumping here at the end, but you start with no factor if you want to put an order in the factors you're pulling, which factor would you pick first to start to explain the market? So the factors we're pulling first here, and that was our interesting result, was that we are pulling first the ESG score. So ESG, we are not saying that it's perfect and everything, because it has a lot of, I'd say, collinearities with other classical factors. And that's why it's not, when you pick ESG, you start by taking a lot of ESG, but then as you start to pick the new other factors, you're reducing the amount of ESG beta you're having. So at the end, it's interesting beta, but it's not as much as it was at the start. And what is the big difference between ESG strictly and the sentiment is that really sentiment, you're just picking it at the end of your regression and you're not taking so much. So you have a real difference between ESG and ESG sentiment. ESG itself can, for example, if you pick it first, it means that if you're an active manager, you can have a process, an investment process, which would be built around ESG plus quality, for example, or ESG plus valuation. And you would be okay, you could perform a lot with a very simplified framework of two pillars for active management. So you will look at, is my ESG doing well? Is my firm a good quality company? And then you mix the two and you can have good screenings for this. This is what being picked early means. It means that is there are good proxies for the market. You're really picking sentiment at the end part of this. So you're not really adding to the equation. It's a plus. So in the literature, as we saw that the volume was interesting, some people cheat a little bit. They mix volume with the sentiment. So they will, and it's true. If we saw that volume was really a powerful information for investors, but if you bring, I mean, it's a little bit strange because if you're doing this regression, you're doing it in the context of efficient market hypothesis, and we said that news should be integrated immediately. So when you're integrating news immediately, you're not so much looking at the quantity of news, a little bit or a lot. The news should be integrated. So the quantity of news cannot really be a subject when your market is efficient. Because if it's efficient, you have the first news, it's in the price. You don't need to have more. It's already in the price. You don't need to repeat it. So we kind of decide not to, in a factor environment, we believe that the volume does not have its place as a factor. It's kind of inconsistent in an efficient market hypothesis context to introduce something which is breaking the efficient market hypothesis. So you bring in a factor of volume which should not exist if market were efficient. So that's why we do not put sentiment on steroids, and it's okay. We found that volume is interesting for active managers by reducing and focusing the investment universe on areas where there is a lot of news. We found that we can bring a lot of value for active managers, and we're okay with that conclusion. So that was. So we say that if sentiment has not yet cracked the factor status. That's what we wanted to say on the subject around the factor investing. And just I want to highlight another point in our research is we crossed. So these are SASB materiality issues, and these are the SDGs. So what we did was that we crossed the keywords coming from description of SDGs and SASBs. We reduced our universe, and we added a layer of materiality coming from the SDGs. What we saw, and which is very interesting for us, is that here, the gap that you can see here on the performance, so that's the material SDG, the real difference in performance, so with the SDG layer, you can see it when you're doing it on the long versus short. So you are doing it on long short and long short. I repeat it. We really see a difference when you run it in long short that you do not see when you run it on a long versus market. So in a long only context, strictly looking at SDGs was not so successful, whereas it is spectacularly successful since 2012. When you look at the, I think this is Europe left, and 2012 also, and when we look at North America, 2013, 2012. Meaning that the performance of this SDG overlay is coming from the short side. Just to say, it's not strange because in the choice that the UNPRI did, they considered that it was more important that the market pricing was integrating SDG, so even from the short side. And I know that it might be shocking for some of you to hear that it's okay for an ESG investor to short. It was a little bit surprising for us also because you have a lot of considerations, such as if you short, maybe you're not doing your proxy voting and these kind of things. But still, it was very important that SDGs can enter the pricing in the market. So the UN did the choice, made this choice to work with hedge funds, which have the capacity to short since early 2010, 2012. There were work groups organized around the hedge fund and integration of ESG, integration of SDGs. So you will find some SDGs oriented hedge fund, which is perfectly okay for the UN. So that's, we found it surprising, but still it was more important for the UNPRI to materialize effects of selection on SDGs rather than sticking to it's not good to short, etc. So it's a result that we found that was a little bit surprising, but which was a choice of which is consistent with the choice of UNPRI. So I think I talked enough. So I hope it was interesting for you. And I'm open to any question if you want to discuss the content of the research.
Okay, thank you very much, Takaya, for this very interesting presentation. Any comments or questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Sophia?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So I was wondering, so these are ESG news. So do they capture positive and negative news, like an improvement, or it's just weaknesses of the company regarding the ESG factors?
Yeah, so maybe we can make a separate session, but when we look at our ESG scores, we also look at the dynamics between the scores. And we found that filtering on the news and looking at the polarity here is an interesting way to anticipate who will move up or who will not move. So the news is a very powerful news, and polarity is a very powerful way to integrate dynamics for ESG. But because there is you can criticize, but these scores, such as emission or this kind of thing, I mean, you're not going to change every week. The access to medicine or remuneration. So these are kind of long-term and not high frequency changes, but the ESG news is let's say is a component which can overlay, which can help you to anticipate the movements and the directions here.
Takaya, just to come back on the same point, actually, do you, just for a sort of a magnitude, because I was, thinking the same way as Sophia in a sense, because, we're flooded with information these days, whether it comes from internet or from social media, from anywhere. That's true for companies. You have information coming from different types of investors, from data providers, from investors on markets, on different platforms. Some of these news are verified, some are not verified, some may be fake, some may be true. So I would have tended to think that if any news would have had an impact at some point, it depends on the kind of news. Basically, the CEO is buying a new suit, we don't really care. But if they're deciding about a new policy, or they're changing something about within the firm, or that may have an impact. So in that sense, it may not be the number of news that really counts, but the quality of the news, or the fact that they can be verified.
Yeah, in the work which is done here, it's not to be perfectly true. It's not really news, it's stakeholder information. So it can be social media accounts which are verified, or it can be information from researchers or blogs which are relevant to the subject. So it's really stakeholder information which is curated, and out of this, you count the news. It's not there is you can do a specific version of this kind of subject with there's a Twitter which is dedicated to stock markets. I forgot the name, but there is a Twitter for stock markets, and you can focus on this axis. But in this case, it's a curated stakeholder information. So there's a work to just check if there's an impact or not from the sources, and then they onboard the news, the stakeholder information, and then you can start to count the volume. And on top of this, you have the materiality framework, which tells you that if you're looking at news regarding carbon emission for, as I told you, for a bank, it is going to be much less relevant than carbon emission for cement or building or construction. You also have the materiality, which is very important here.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, please? Yeah. Thank you. So I'm from the University Paris-Est Créteil, and I'm interested by this subject particularly because in 2020, I published a paper in Global Finance Journal about the ESG information and how to integrate this information in stock prices. So I compared, for example, CRPM, 3-factor model, 5-factor model with a competent model where I introduce ESG factor. So my first question is about the ESG factor that you consider. So for my understanding, and from your presentation, I understood that your ESG factor is constructed upon the information from Amundi. So it is inside information. It is not an information which is valuable for all investors. So it is somehow a problem, because when we test a model, we test the information available for investors. And for example, in my study, I considered asset for score to construct the ESG factor. And my hypothesis was this information is available for all investors or professional institution investors. So I would like to understand if it is integrated in the stock market. So it is. I don't know what is the evaluability of the information of ESG Amundi score for investors. So it is, I think that it is important to consider this point. And the second question is to understand why you find opposite results from my study, because I find that we consider European firms, and in our sample we had 1,010 European firms, and we consider the period from 2002 to 2015. And we find that European firms with bad ESG scores have higher returns than firms with good ESG score. And my explanation was related to the trade-off risk-return. So I considered that firms with bad scores are considered by investors as risky firms, and that's why we remunerate the risk. So we have a premium in the for those firms. You find exactly the opposite result, I think, between Q1 and Q5 in your sample in the introduce. And so I would like to hear you about your explanation for this result exactly. Well, what is the intuition? Perhaps you have another point of view. It will be interesting.
Okay, so for your first question, it's true that we are not giving free access to our Amundi score, but this is also because of licensing issues. Yeah. Because as I mentioned, we will need to sub-license the vendors which are behind, because there is a component by the Amundi ESG analyst desk to choose which provider is good for what sector. So there's an expertise in the combination of the scores. On top of that, we have a 10 people, 10 analyst desk, which is in live evaluating the consistency of the score, the sector and the choices. In addition, what I want to say here is that you mentioned that for the MU, you're looking at 2015 period. Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned here, we were really surprised by our results when we, it has a really clear 2014 break, because I will show you a chart here, but try to find it. But there's a real difference in what is ESG for the market and for the economy overall. So if you let me just a second here. The real difference is that there's a big change in integration of ESG in our everyday life because of the regulation side. So you did not have regulation for ESG before this becomes very active.
Yeah.
And I would say that I agree with you. Before 2014, for us on the 2010 to 2014 period, we see good and bad ESG is equivalent. So this is, you can do good or you can do bad. It does not really change the pricing. So that was the approach we had, and we agree with you. Before 2014, we would say that you can do ESG by choice, but you need to diversify your portfolio a lot so that it does not impact your portfolio so much. When you have all the regulation which comes in 2014, etc., then you have a market when investors start to look at the better ESG. You have some regulation. You need for asset owners, they need to justify why they hold bad ESG companies, etc. Which this this change the supply-demand situation around ESG.
And so, even also the information about ESG, do you project, for example, to compete your results with other ESG scores? Not only on the ESG score of Amundi. I think it will be interesting.
We run some recent analysis around the MSCI ESG scores.
Yeah.
But I can give you some figures. But for us, accessing the historical data from MSCI means there's a cost which thousands of it's can maybe 10-20,000 euro licensing cost. So there is this licensing side. If you're a researcher, I'm sure that MSCI will be happy to disclose their scores with you. No, I'm sure they do it for academic purposes.
Yeah.
So it's not on. It's
no,
more,
my question is to be sure that your results are not dependent only on your ESG score, but it is dependent on the ESG intersect information about the firm.
Yeah,
that's just my.
If I can just jump in the discussion, allow me. I'm Jean-Marie Dumas, and Fixed Income Solutions at Amundi. Just to be frank, that's first is whatever the score you choose. If you choose something which is public, it is not also a consensus or a market consensus. It will just give you one thing coming from one provider. Our ESG score is based on a lot of providers with an internal algorithmic computations to get something to give an ESG score at the end, which we think gives also some consistency to the on less bias towards the provider. Thereafter, of course, it's not a purpose of an academic research. It's a research produced by an asset management boutique running 1.8 trillion euro of assets. So, which is for us, I would say, a good representation of what can impact the market, and especially in Europe. But that's for sure for us that the value of also this is based on our score, because that's scores which are employed directly in concrete day-to-day investment, and not just a provider topic.
So,
Takaya, you want to add something?
Yes, I'm showing you the chart on cumulative regulations. So this is really to give you the mood on why we believe that there's really acceleration after 14 period. This is regulation. So when we brought our results, fund managers with whom we have a dialogue would say, okay, so maybe 2014, 2017, the results you have are just a glitch in one side. And in the next 3-4 years, it will go back on the other way. But our thinking here is that with addition of regulation, plus I would say on the climate side, that's why we focus on the climate also, is that the climate measures cannot be taken back. You know, you are not moving in a temperature zone, which is the situation is constantly degrading. So you have to take this into consideration so that stakeholders just cannot consider that the recent performance of ESG is something which will mean revert. There's no mean reversion going on, and it shows that normally on academic basis and on fundamental factors, we like to have long periods for our analysis. However, we are making an exception in the case of ESG, and we are preferring to say maybe there was an inflection point around 14, 15.
Yeah.
And from that inflection point, are we going to mean revert, or are we going in the direction where you need to integrate this? So we are making this kind of temporal choice to say that you need to project yourself towards the 10, 50 years to come. And when you see let's say the 1.5 degree scenario, can you reach it, and this kind of studies, the firm's cumulative emission track records are not good, meaning that there has to be either action by corporates or additional regulation. So, for example, the addition of carbon costs, etc. So what we start to see, which is a very short period from 2014, etc., you have to think of the environment around to see if, as a traditional factor, you can prefer to have 13 years of history and then be comfortable to say it's a new factor. But in our case, as we are also involved in managing money and looking at the performance, etc., we say that we are starting to see something which is very spectacular on the ESG side, starting, I would say, 2014, etc., in Europe. Looking forward, we make the choice to consider that this is the next big factor. So maybe we don't have the full year and track record here, but we choose to break around 2014 and say, this is the behavior of ESG before, this is the current behavior of ESG.
Yeah, I agree with you for the evolution of.
Sorry, Suad. I think for the sake of time, we need to move on to the second paper. I'm sure you can continue the discussion with Takaya. We're running late on schedule, as you can see. Second presentation is by Jean-Marie Dumas on temperature scores and innovative tools for ESG fundamental investors. Jean-Marie, I know you're around. You stepped in a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm here, sir. And I will do the presentation with Mathieu Joanneau, with our key expert on temperature score and let's say pure dedicated ESG indicators, as there's a lot of things to do on that regard. As Takaya previously said, the market is evolving a lot with more regulations, with a new investment process to settle. With more and more ESG data to incorporate in our way to look at assets, to look at corporate behavior and corporate profile. And so that's what we would like to talk about today. And so I think that the presentation is shared, or must I do it? Yeah, okay.
You can share your screen.
I share my screen. Okay, yes. This one. Okay, I think you can see it now. And so clearly, one of the hot topic, without saying too much puns, is on climate, because you know that there is a clear agenda for institutional investors coming from the translation of the different COP. So we'll have this at this end of the year, the COP26, and I would say that since the COP21, there's clear target to mitigate the climate change through investments and to put our investments in the direction of a real energy transition. When we say that, so of course we saw a lot of special instruments developed, like green bonds, like sustainability linked bonds. I would talk only about debt investments because that's my expertise, and that's where I would say we can lead money towards green efficient projects and to corporate profile change. But I would say that we have now to go a step further to be able to design investment process which takes into consideration those kind of problematics. And when we say that, the first thing is to be sure that we can have indicators, I mean, on quantifications, which can really help us in a day-to-day, in our day-to-day investment decisions, or in our medium-term also portfolio constructions when is it in relation with bond portfolio, for example. So perhaps to figure out what we're talking about is this global emissions in greenhouse gases, so which are in equivalent ton of CO2. So globally speaking, we are at the highest point, and every year we are at the highest point, in spite of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which really drove the growth in negative terms. In fact, the CO2 emission production just decelerated, but not stopped and even reduced. So that's, and when you look at the green part of the graph, it's what is projected till the Paris Agreement, so the COP 2021, in terms of direction. If we want to go back to a 1.5 degrees Celsius transition, so with this idea of going to a scenario where there will be no rise in the global temperature of more than 2 degrees. And so if we want to be in line with that, we have to go very quick with a 7% reduction per year till 2050. So which means it's a big goal. So when we say we want to be Paris Agreement aligned, or we want to further our investment into the right direction for climate change mitigation, it's not just a small promise. It's more than that. That's a very consistent commitment, which means that, of course, there must be impact in our way to invest. And so we have to be able now to measure how our investments are related to this kind of thing. And that is why we developed Temperature Score with the help of providers, and that we rely on that for our choice of assets, and especially for our funds, which aims to be Paris aligned, or which aims to favor climate change mitigation. When we look at the way this CO2 emissions is per region, for sure, you will see the good players and the probably worst one. The most important part of emissions is coming from Asia. Not a big surprise, because you have that all the industrial production is made, globally speaking, not all, but a major part. Of course, Northern America is the second most important producer, and we could say that if we look at the pan-European footprint, it's quite low compared to what it represents geographically. But for sure, there's a lot of things to do. Just to give you some quantifications, here we are talking about gigatons of CO2 per region. When, for example, I bring on the table a portfolio which is a 300 million euro portfolio of investments, which is really green in its investment process and with a clear investment objective of reducing CO2 emissions, I would say that the natural figure for the avoided emissions of CO2 is near 400 tons. So you see that one portfolio, 400 tons, one average portfolio, it's not the biggest one, but one average portfolio, 400 tons. When we look at just a region, is from 3 to 17 gigatons of CO2. So which means that it's really a question for all the investment community to integrate those kind of things in their investment choice if we want to be realistic and to have a real impact at the end. And that is why when you look at the warming projections, when you look at where we are after the recent history and what are the baseline scenario, if nothing is done, we are more in the 4 to 4.8 degrees scenario than the 2 degrees, which is acceptable for the Paris Agreement. And with current policies, we should go probably with around 3, but not being very optimistic. So that is why there's a need to go further and to integrate new ways to look at investments. So that's for the general context, I would say, but just to keep in mind that there's a hard pressure, and that's not an easy subject, because we know that if nothing is done, then reality is even worse than what we can just have in mind. Then question is, how to be impactful clearly is to have metrics to measure how our investments are regarding those kind of scenarios of temperature. So, and in investment, you need to have really integrated and aggregate indicators, because if you want to decide and to make your choice rationally, it has to be easy to catch, but it has also to be robust. So that's where the difficulty is, I would say. You will not project your portfolio in a big econometrical model every day for sure, and every time you have to buy a bond. So you need to have something which can sum up this, and which can help the whole investment community to understand where they are and where they stand. And so the temperature score is an easy way to look at it, with a final temperature, which is assigned to the companies which are issuing financial instruments and financial securities, going from less than 2 degrees. So say let's
we lost him?
I believe Jean-Marie's screen is frozen.
Yes.
What we can do?
Mathieu, I don't know if you can.
Yes, maybe
follow.
I can take over.
Yeah.
On slide 5, and if Jean-Marie comes back, he can finish the presentation. So the idea behind and I can share the presentation as well, because I see it has disappeared.
You have the slides, Mathieu?
Yeah, I do. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea behind the temperature metric is, as Jean-Marie explained, is to measure the alignment of a corporate with a given temperature rise for the planet. So actually, it is a metric that aims at being quite straightforward to understand, and that aims at saying, okay, this company is more or less aligned with a 2-degree pathway, or more with a 3 or 4-degree pathway. So to compute this kind of metrics, you need 3 things. You need first the historical carbon emissions of the company, so what the company has been doing in terms of emissions over the past 10 to 15 years. Second, you need the carbon reduction target of the company, so where the company plans to go in the next 20 to 30 years. And with those 2 elements, you compute a trajectory in terms of carbon emissions for the corporate, for the issuer. And then you need a third element, which is the climate scenario, which will tell you what kind of temperature rise you will end up with if you emit such amount of CO2 emissions. So basically saying, you need to go to 0 emissions by 2050 if you want to comply with a 1.5 degree of global warming. So with those 3 elements, you are able to compute an issuer temperature score that you're then able to implement into portfolio management processes, and with which you are able to compute a portfolio temperature. So what we did at Amundi is that we looked at several providers that provide this kind of metrics. Here you have the elements on 3 providers: CDP, Iceberg Data Lab, and Trucost. And actually, the assumptions that they take for constructing their methodologies are quite important, and you have to bear in mind those assumptions when manipulating those kind of metrics, because they have dramatic impacts on the results that you get. So for instance, if I look only at one element of those methodologies, which is the scope of emissions that are taken into account by the providers, you see that both CDP and Iceberg Data Lab look at all scope 3 emissions. So for those who are not familiar with this concept, it means that they look at both the direct emissions of the company, so what the company actually emits doing its operation. So for instance, when an electricity producer make electricity, it emits emissions through the power generating manufacturing process. But also on the two other scopes, so scope 2 and 3, you also have indirect emissions. So emissions coming from the supply chain of the company, or even coming from the use of the products and services that you have that you get from the company. So if you look at CDP Iceberg, you have the full value chain of emissions, I would say, taken into account. If you look at Trucost, you only have scope 1 and 2 emissions, so you have only a partial view, and this will impact the results in sectors where scope 3 has a dramatic importance. So that's only one assumption, but you have many assumptions that drive the results and that can explain the discrepancies that you get in the results, and that we'll explore later. So if I go into a bit more detail on one methodology, so focusing on Iceberg Data Lab methodology, you have here what I explained before, so the 3 elements that are used in the methodology. On the graph shown, you have the green line, which is actually the reference coming from the climate scenario. So in the case of this methodology, it comes from the Science-Based Target initiatives. And actually, this line tells you that you need to comply with this pathway in order to stay below 2 degrees if you are in a given sector. So it tells you actually what amount of emissions you're allowed to emit if you want to stay below 2 degree warming. And then you have the blue line, which is the trajectory of the issuer, of the corporate. So you have the past trajectory in between 2010 and 2020. And here you see that the company is actually well below the reference line, which is quite good. And then you have the projected trajectory, which is the dotted blue line. And here you see that it crosses the green line. So actually the company we will end up above the reference point that we want to achieve. And so the providers compute the temperature of the company by looking at the red area over the graph, so the over or under budget calculated for the company. And basically, if you have a positive over budget, you'll have a temperature above 2 degrees. And if you have a negative one, you'll have a temperature that is actually below 2 degrees, which is again the reference for this methodology. So maybe looking at two examples to better understand the methodology. So here we took the example of Enel, so an electricity producer, and Peugeot, so an automobile manufacturer. So in the case of Enel, again, you have the green line, which is the reference trajectory for the utility sector, so the electricity producing sector. And you see that Enel actually crosses this line. So you have the past emissions of Enel and actually the projected emissions of Enel as well. So in that case, you see that Enel has a strong commitment to reduce its emissions. So it's actually gonna reduce it quite a lot. But over the past few years, they haven't reduced that much, which is why they cross the reference, and which is why they end up with a temperature that is above 2 degrees, so 2.25 degrees. And in the case of Peugeot, you see that over the past 10 years, they have reduced dramatically their emissions to go from above the reference point to below it. So they're actually on a very good path, and they plan to continue down this path by 2050. So actually staying below the green line. And that is why they end up with a temperature that is quite in line with the 2 degree objective, so below 2 degrees to 1.94 degrees. I don't know if Jean-Marie is back.
I am.
Yes, you are. So
yeah,
I can hand over to you for next slide, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mathieu. And of course, the energy sector is a really important sector for the energy transition, but it is also important to have a look at the financial ones, and especially banking. Just to keep in mind, for example, in a credit portfolio, bond portfolio invested only in issuances coming from private sectors. 50% of the portfolio is, and all the indices are constituted by financial issuers. So that's really important to have in mind what it means for financial institutions. And roughly, I would say that the whole sector is near the 3 degrees target, so above the 2 degree clearly. And what we can see is, for example, for Crédit Agricole, we are at 2.8, and JP Morgan Chase Bank, so US bank, one of the most important banks in the world, it's at 3 degrees, with a split coming from their US activities for sure. You see the light blue is North America, whereas of course the split of activities is clearly in favor of Europe, namely France and Italy. But I would say that in financial sectors there are probably less discrepancies. The key question is how to take into account the CO2 emissions with the question of the scope 3, or the indirect emission, which is very important. And that is why we favor providers who are taking into account the scope 3, because we think that without it, the temperature score is not really meaningful for financial institutions and banks particularly, whereas we know that it's very important that banks favor financing which are taking into account the climate change consideration. On next slide, we put a representation of the main indices in terms of temperature scores, with the two main investment world. I would say on the left side you will see global credit, and on the right side the global equity. Just to keep in mind that in fact, due to the probably more important diversity of companies which are constituting the bond index, because a bond index is usually, for example, a global credit index is around 6,000 different issuers, whereas on a global equity you will be more on hundreds of company. So thanks to this diversification, in fact, you can see that there are probably less 3 to 3.5 degrees companies, but there are also more companies which have no temperature score assigned for the time being, due to the lack of data still, or lack of information globally on those issuers, because you will find some smaller ones in some geographies which are more exotic, I would say. If you focus more on Europe, it's the next slide. But you will see that it's probably same kind of conclusion we can have. Probably on a bond portfolio, it's easier to have a lower temperature because you have more assets which are posting, let's say, between 2.5 degrees and 3 degrees, and 3.5, whereas on equities you will have more on 3 to 3.5. But clearly, always the question of coverage and access to information, true for us, true for temperature score providers. So which is very often on those new developments, the main elements if we want to be impactful, and also if we want to perform and to do a concrete thing for the global investor community. Probably here it's more to on this slide to give a representation of the different providers for temperature score, the main one, and the Trucost and CDP. So Trucost is Iceberg Data Lab, and CDP. And just to have in mind that there's a question of, once again, data representation and a change in terms of distribution. So there is no consensus for the time being. That's very often the case with ESG scores as a whole, but on temperature score, as it is probably more nascent and more innovative, there is also more discrepancies, and so it is very important to have a clear look of the methodology. We are not talking about a sort of norm in the market, so we have to go into the details to look at the different splits, and you will see that there's a consequence in terms of sectors. So which means that choosing a provider for a temperature score has a direct impact on the way you will look at your portfolio and the way you will build your asset investments. That's what we do at Amundi with having on our portfolio monitoring tool a direct access to the scores with the different representations of the different providers. That's important to know to have the whole set of information. But of course, at some point, when you have to take a decision, you have to reduce this information set, and so you have to decide where you are, let's say, in confidence, where you trust and what you trust. What is important is to be sure that the issuers are SBT approved, so meaning that they give information to the market. That's probably the first engagement we ask to the companies, is to go into that direction, to provide information which will then enable to establish this kind of temperature score. After, it's just a representation of how we monitor our portfolio on that regard. Probably to end up, because we were quite long, just to keep in mind that across providers, the average of the market is not to be Paris aligned, is not to be under 2 degrees trajectory or less. It's really more to be, as I said, in 3 degrees around. So which is not a good news, but which shows that we have to move and to go fast into the direction and to change our investment processes. Of course, we will not change the discrepancies between geographies, and particularly between US and Euro. And as a direct consequence, if you build a global credit portfolio and you want to favor the temperature score, for sure you will have a bias towards European issuers. So which is also, in terms of risk, return consideration, something you have to keep in mind. In fact, a global portfolio with a temperature score at the heart of the investment process means to be a little bit biased towards Europe. So which has a consequence in terms of risk and performance. That's important. And of course, there are some discrepancies across sectors. So just to show that it's not something which is neutral in terms of portfolio construction, and to say that we want to have investments which are doing good for climate means that we have to accept this kind of bias, and we cannot work in a sort of risk neutral arbitrage world. When you do that, you recombine your investment universe and you accept to be biased. Mathieu, you wanted to add something perhaps on those main takeaways?
Yeah, just also one thing to add on top of this is that actually the techniques to compute temperature metrics are quite new. It's quite an innovative metric that we implemented into our portfolio management process, but they are meant to evolve over time. As data providers will improve their data collection processes and their methodologies. So it's something that we need to continuously monitor, and that needs to also to have in mind when we use such metrics. And finally, just also one key takeaway that we found in the paper is that looking at the distribution of temperatures to us is really what helps us understand where we are at the moment and where the issuers of main credit and equity indices are, to really help us engage with those companies and build portfolios that are actually relevant to the alignment with the Paris Agreement.
Thank you very much, Mathieu and Jean-Marie. Questions from the audience?
I have one. So regarding your, I think it's slide 12, where you have the distribution by sectors and by data provider. So I was expecting that, CDP always reports lower CO2 emissions. Is it true? Because I was expecting that Trucost that only reports scope 1 and 2 are the one that reports lower CO2.
So actually, the results that we get here, and the reason why CDP has usually lower temperatures is because they do not take into account in their methodologies the past emissions performance. So they don't look at the past emissions trajectory, but they only assess the targets, the carbon reduction targets of a company. So we only have a positive effect. So, and that's what we explained before. It's really the assumptions taken in that methodology that drives the results. And that's something to really have in mind.
I also had one question. So these are, I think, very interesting tools to follow the trajectory of CO2 emission from these from a firm's point of view. But my question was from an asset manager point of view. How can you, of course you got these tools, but how can you intervene or how can you step in or have an impact on the trajectory of these companies? There are the tools and then there's the implementation of these tools. So what do we do with them actually? So what's your perspective from on that point from an asset management point of view?
Yeah, clearly that's the key point is first, I would say to have a clear picture of our investments in the perspective of the energy transition and the climate change mitigation. So which means that the temperature source give us, I would say, an easy way to detect the good players and on the less good players. I would say. So which means that then we can detect, for example, companies that we do like, where we do believe in the business profile, but which are not really suitable in that perspective, even if we are talking about performing assets. And so the question is, when we have this kind of detection, that's we engage with the companies just to show to them that probably they are not really aligned in terms of trajectory. Not to say that they have to change tomorrow, but they have to change the day after tomorrow. So they have to commit publicly. That's what we do. In fact, is to say to them that they have to go in that direction with public commitment, with targets, with clear targets, potentially also identifying projects where they can be supportive to that climate change mitigation. And of course, if we do it with just one portfolio, or let's say just one side business, that's not really worth it. But that's where it comes from also this regulation pressure that that we, for example, we have the SFDR directive, which means that more and more mutual funds and investments, even for institutional clients, will have to say that they incorporate some sustainable investments with potential direct impact on carbon emission and carbon footprint. And so that's where, with that regulatory pressure, in fact, the global investment community is going into that direction. But of course, at the end, the way to translate it concretely is through engagement coming from the companies which are issuing these financial instruments. So meaning the private sector, but also the sovereigns, the quasi-sovereign. And when I say private sector, it's both banking and industrial ones. So not just letting, I would say, this question to the favorite angle, which is energy producer or companies with impact and so on. No, it's to go to the large cap, to go to the mid cap, to go everywhere and to say, okay, now our investments are really measured through that kind of metrics. And for sure, we will not favor the ones which are completely at the tail risk. Probably we can live with some which are at 3 degrees around, but if our portfolio has to be at the end Paris aligned, and if we want to be into that trajectory of the 2 degrees, if we want to build products with this question of, for example, the net zero trajectory, all this kind of scores at the end are translated through direct engagement that we are asking to issuers and globally companies. Of course, on the equity side, you have also the voting topic, which is important. But as a creditor, I would say I stay at my place, which is just choosing to fund or not. And what I can say is that probably 5 years ago, I could say no matter about the environmental impact, I will go because I know that there will be a kind of premium, and I will benefit from that for performance. But what I say is that more and more it becomes difficult to catch this kind of performance because at the end people want to have something which is more and more Paris aligned. So that's okay. The way we work.
One thing I was wondering, suppose I'm an investor and I'm being asked to make effort, or I'm asking companies to make effort to reduce their CO2 emission. And then I look at the data, because the data you have is basically the accurate data we have is really on the North American market, European market. We have more information on these markets. And I look at the data, and the sum of Europe and the United States in terms of CO2 emission is basically the quantity of CO2 emission by China, one country. Right? And then I say, okay, suppose we do all these efforts and we do all these sacrifices. It does take effort to reduce their CO2 emission. There's a transformation process and it's costly for the firm. And at the end, basically, all of this is not for much anyway, because if we don't all do it, then it's like a prisoner's dilemma. You end up in the wrong square and you lost everything, and the others have kept polluting. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but how do you see these things from an asset manager's point of view? How can you convince people to really do this when, if we don't all do it, then we may miss the target?
That's where I would say that the global impact is important. You're right. It's not just a question for developed countries. That's a question also for emerging countries, and even more when you look at Asia. The first thing is that the most important, let's say, investment is coming from developed countries, and if we, of course, because production is coming from Asia a lot. But savings are and investment power is a lot coming from developed countries. So when we change the global setup of investment, and for sure, we have to keep in mind that this ESG stuff on carbon footprint regulation and so on, even just for reporting, is a complete revolution. I think that's the most. I'm in the markets for the last. I've been in the market for the last 20 years, and it's probably the most important revolution I've experienced, more than the global financial crisis, which at the end did not change a lot the investment behavior. I did not experience any change of utility function of investors after the Lehman crisis and the Lehman default. Whereas here, with the ESG stuff, we really have something which is coming around, which is well known by environmental economists, with this question of externalities coming now into the internal function of economics. So that's something which is really new. I think that 20 years ago, people were saying, okay, it's good for people who want to do their charity business and so on. Now we are talking about the core investments. We are not talking about the side investments. So that is why I would say it is changing, and that is why there is also clear answer coming even from countries like China. Probably it's slower because for them it's a big challenge for their model. But the question is that they are also penalized. And when you live in Beijing, for sure, you know what it means to have too much CO2 emissions around. Huh? And at the end, there's a question for your own population also. So that's we cannot be naive. Huh? There will not be the same path, same rhythm, because for them the sacrifice is very important. So the question is how to change it into not a sacrifice, but something which is more classical, would say, optimization, and where you do better if you take it to account than doing nothing. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you very much. Other questions from the audience? No other questions? Then, there's one question within question. I can read it about this interesting question. Should we give more tolerance for companies in emerging markets?
Yeah, at the end, that's what we do by as Matthew said, looking at the distribution of a portfolio, looking at having benchmarks also in our head, not only having absolute targets. And the question also regarding that is about trajectory. So there is an initial point and there's a target. So by acting like this, in fact, you give more tolerance, but you really have to mark an inflection point at some point. That's what is important.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Okay, if there's no other question, then I'll thank everyone. I think it was a very interesting webinar. Typically, we have academics presenting. For the first time, we have two colleagues in real asset managers in a real asset management firm, which are inside and they see these issues from a different angle, obviously, because they're involved in using these issues from an asset management point of view. So it's very interesting to see their perspective on this. We thank you very much. Thank you very much, Takaya, Jean-Marie, and Guillaume, Mathieu, sorry, for this very interesting presentation. As it was mentioned, the presentation will be available on the ESSEC Amundi webpage. And you'll probably receive a mail by Vanessa with the link, everything. So if you want to see the presentation, it's been recorded. If you can watch it again. Well, I wish you a very good vacation to everyone. Hope you stay safe. I'm not sure when's the next webinar. We're planning for a next one, not this summer, obviously. We are in June now. So the next one will probably be in September. You'll be contacted again for the next one. So I wish you a very good summer. Stay safe. Get vaccinated if possible. If you believe in vaccination, I hope so. If we want to get back our real life, I think we shall all get vaccinated. That's just my own message. That's the nice thing of being managing the webinar. So take very good care of you and see you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.